Bien. Altesse Royale.
Your Royal Highness, ladies and gentlemen, heads of state and government, ministers, excellencies, I'd like to start off by welcoming all of you to the summit. And I would also like to thank all of you for being here in Paris. Some of you have actually come from very far. And I think this is a very important moment for all of us because for the first time, Paris has brought together all the international experts on the cryosphere. People who know about poles, about ice caps, permafrost, in fact, every frozen surface worldwide is covered by your subjects. I'd like to thank our ambassador for all the work that he has carried out over the past couple of days, and also for organizing this totally new and different sort of meeting. And I hope that this will help us take common decisions. Now, what we have all noticed and remarked upon and discussed is that the cryosphere is deteriorating and collapsing. Everything is happening faster than what had been planned in the past decades or foreseen. And this phenomenon, obviously the immediate and most obvious phenomenon is the melting of our ice surfaces worldwide is something which has an impact on biodiversity, on mankind, and on our civilizations, because sea surfaces are going to go up, and this is going to affect coastlines. There's going to be a scarcification of drinking water. There's going to be climate migration, great release of CO2, and new pandemic risks. All these threats are real, and in fact, in the next decades, the CO2 effects are going to be felt. And also, at the same time, there is very little or not enough understanding of the links between the cryosphere and climate. There are areas of the Antarctic that have not been developed. There's not enough cooperation on glaciers. And given the fact that they are at risk of disappearing, of course, this represents a major area for all of us to study. And also, very frequently, these are the areas that there are true sources of biodiversity that have to be preserved. All of us obviously are wanting her to develop this. But given the fact that in our world, conflicts are once again on the agenda in the Middle East and elsewhere, and therefore this is obviously going to fragilize, make more fragile the relations that we have. But we have to do our best to work closely together in a peaceful and in full cooperation, particularly in the area of these sciences. And that is what this summit was all about. We will talk about this later on. But I think this is part of the One Planet philosophy as well. We will be launching activities. We will bring together all those who are working for poles and glaciers. This is why I'd like to thank all of you for the work that you have carried out and the preparations leading up to this work. Given the fact that we are here in the Gallery of the Evolution at the Museum of Natural History, it is obviously a throbbing heart, so to speak, in Paris of knowledge. And we can feel, looking around us, that there are species around us, some who have been saved, some that have been lost, and many of these might be due to human activities as well. We have also taken steps to launch new activities in polar areas. Ambassadors, I'd like to thank you for this, and I would like us to work together in this area and together. I will not take the floor for much longer. I suggest we start our discussions. Let's start off with the scientists, shall we? Let's ask the duo, Jérôme Chaplaz and Antje Boetes, who have worked together, who will be publishing their report in a few minutes. It is the first report that has been published on the cryosphere after the IPCC one, which was in 2019. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you for giving the sciences of cryosphere the floor. But now I'd like to switch to English.
First of all, as you have just pointed out,
the science that we brought together here, the updates, they show an even more dramatical change. They show that the white landscapes, the cryosphere, is the sentinel, the canary in the coal mine of climate and biodiversity crises due to what you called les bêtises humaines, human pressures, including further greenhouse gas emissions. We, the scientific community, we call again primarily for applying the most obvious solution to the problems, to the grand challenges, reduce emissions, phase out new fossil fuel investments, and provide protection to the unique life that we see around us. Humanity bears already a huge commitment with the cryosphere. Every additional emission brings additional losses, ice melt, loss of biodiversity, higher risks with extremes. Many of the new observations we have heard in the past 2 days are alerting us because they show a trajectory toward irreversible losses. In addition, with these losses, we lose the memory of our planet, the icy memory, as well as that of our own human culture. And all of this affects more people and more nations than we anticipated.
Mr. President, since the last IPCC report, we've seen continuing sea ice anomalies in the Arctic, but also new sea ice losses in Antarctica. We've seen an acceleration of glacial disintegration everywhere, even with the highest glaciers, Greenland and Antarctica. Remember, 1 centimeter of additional sea level increase, 1 centimeter, means that 2 to 3 million additional human beings will be threatened by annual floods. Remember, every ton of additional carbon dioxide in the atmosphere removes 2 to 3 square meters of sea ice in the Arctic, 1 ton. Remember, 2 billion people rely on water resources coming from mountain glaciers, 2 billion. Remember, on the way to 1.5 degrees Celsius warming, we could see 100 to 200 gigatons of carbon being released from permafrost. That is up to 5 years of global CO2 emission by human beings. Additional wildfires in the Arctic bring an additional threat.
That knowledge clearly must lead to action, but there are also poorly known aspects of the cryosphere. And depending on the greenhouse gas trajectories that we choose, science, all the data we have, they alert us that there are even greater uncertainties working against us. In particular, ocean and ice sheet interactions in Antarctica, they will drive future sea level amplitude and timing, and they require new sets of observations and modeling to allow us eventually to better adapt. Increases in droughts will imply displacements of populations and will increase conflicts. They require anticipation through dedicated science. And this potential carbon bomb, the excess of methane especially, that aggressive greenhouse gas from permafrost melting, that may largely increase further the gap towards our climate goals. We want to stress here that the cost of adaptation increases so rapidly in the future that it exceeds transformation and also mitigation costs. However, we would also like to stress that all these risks are manageable through international collaborations and rapid concerted action.
And this is how heads of state can help. Science is the best partner if enabled to support society with better projections, reduction of uncertainties, finding solutions. Science is the best partner in defining how to protect and restore marine and terrestrial hotspots in ecosystems in an efficient and sustainable manner. Science is also the sensor of achievement or failure or of good governance around climate challenges, but also about pollution and overuse. Science has always provided solutions and innovation, but without stronger governmental pushes and investments, this would be too slow with respect to the global crisis we are facing.
And that's why we call for your help in supporting and organizing us. Help us set up these new ambitious and international missions in the Arctic and the Antarctic, in the mountain regions. We have had here speakers, leaders of the young generation of cryosphere scientists who are fully committed. They are highly international and very diverse, but they need support, protection. A great outcome of the summit was this new momentum between high altitude and high latitude science. So help us maintain those dynamics with repeated international coalitions and gatherings like the summit. Science needs also to transform itself. We've discussed here a lot. We need to be more inclusive with indigenous communities, local practitioners, and we require also to reduce our own footprint, in particular in the polar regions and on the glaciers. But that needs all of your strong support on renovating and sharing our infrastructures as well as including new technologies. Cryosphere science needs robotics, needs artificial intelligence and securing long-term monitoring, including from space.
Science should not be sacrificed in geopolitical conflicts. Science must be enabled to protect those who are forbidden to speak the truth. Common interest requires protection of international collaboration. Science of the cryosphere heavily depends on this, and timing is running too fast with cryospheric losses. Thank you for your attention.
Merci beaucoup.
300 scientists have been working for 2 months. The report that you're going to get is extremely detailed with information about the collapse of the cryosphere. But the new IPCC chair and president is here, Jimske.
President, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it is a privilege to address this distinguished group of political leaders. Now, over the last 2 days and in the last few minutes, I think we've heard the very clear case for urgent action on climate change. And I think one of the issues that faces us in IPCC is how to communicate that science both to political leaders and to society at large. And clearly, making the case for urgent action is a key part of it. But I do want to mention 2 other themes or concepts that might guide our communication strategy. The risk of urgency by itself is that it creates a sense of despair and a sense of not being able to act. And I do want to mention something that came clearly out from the last IPCC reports was the question of agency, which is giving a question of hope. We human beings do have the ability to make a difference and avoid the worst impacts of climate change. We have the technologies, we have the policy tools, we have the means of mobilizing finance if we choose to take these up and take them forward. So this question of agency, I think, is extremely important, and it comes out of the work we did on Working Group 3 in mitigation. It also applies Working Group 2 on adaptation. I think the way that we exercise that agency is also absolutely critical. And it has 2 dimensions, and one of them is international, because the most vulnerable people on the planet are those who've contributed least to climate change. And unless we recognize that fact in deciding how to move forward, I think it will be difficult to get movement. The question of equity, I think, also applies within countries. We need just transitions in order to move forward. We need transitions that are and are perceived to be fair. Otherwise, the transitions that we need to happen will not gain acceptance and will not move forward. So I want to argue that these triple concepts of urgency, which we need to communicate, the agency, the ability to act, and the ability to use the agency in an equitable way is absolutely critical, and it very much comes out of the recent IPCC reports. And of course, in exercising that agency, as my colleagues have just said, political leadership is absolutely critical. But I would like to assure you that at the start of the IPCC 7th cycle, we are completely committed to providing you, adding to the robust science that you already have, that will help to direct and guide action in the future. So that is my aspiration for the next 7 years, having just been elected as chair of IPCC, and I'm very much welcome being able to contribute to this distinguished gathering.
Je vous laisserai remettre.
Well, thank you very much. I look forward to reading the detailed report, which you will hand over to the President. There are 2 million inhabitants in those regions. Thank you for the report. 2 billion inhabitants in those regions, in the high plateaus and in the Arctic, and over 3 billion of them are threatened by rising sea level. These populations, we brought them together for the purpose of this summit, indigenous people and local communities, and they're very, very concerned. You will be able to ask Pascal Lamy, who's been working on this with Mrs. Pons and Monsieur Didiou for 6 weeks on trying to understand what the point of view of the locals is and the civilian population. Thank you very much, Chairman. So very briefly, and to bring together the recommendations conveyed to me, as Olivier Poivre-Davos said, because he's been moderating the summit for the past 2 days. So, starting with the point of view of the civil society and the largest NGOs, or some specialized in the cryosphere, have mobilized their efforts. And they have adopted a declaration. And Geneviève Pons has coordinated this. Their recommendations are, and it's not surprising to hear, very much in line with those of scientists, and 3 points of focus, which are the following. First of all, the imperious need to limit the temperature from rising above 1.5 degrees centigrade to be able to preserve a large part of the cryosphere, at least 2/3 of it. And then, second point of focus, to protect the ecosystems, as we said, which were largely damaged by the extension of marine protected areas in the southern seas, which is based on, this, for it to change, requires political decisions. And thirdly, to focus on the recommendations that are forwarded to us by the local populations. They are other stakeholders who took part in this summit and seem to point them in the same direction, and are in line with the scientists' recommendations I'm talking about. Explorers on the need for international cooperation, pooling data, infrastructure and equipment in order to limit costs and to reduce their carbon footprints on the environment. And they're well aware of that. And lastly, a coalition of cities and regions that are affected by rising seawater levels. And the last thing that we looked into, which will be the subject matter of the upcoming conference on oceans in June, jointly organized by Costa Rica and France. So that is it. Now let's watch a short video with testimonials on the cryosphere.
Merci beaucoup. Merci bien. On va peut-être remettre le son.
No sound? We're waiting for the sound. This is a message for technicians.
But now the Arctic is changing so fast. We are paddling where we used to ski. And polar bears are scavengers on land instead of hunting for seals on ice floes. I need to tell what is happening, and also how important snow and ice is for sustaining life on the planet. This is the most important expedition ever. And this call for action goes to all of us. Simply because we're all a part of the problem, and then we also all have to take part in finding solutions. And maybe we can use this enormous challenge that climate change truly represents to bring out the best in us and reveal what humanity can become.
My grandfather is the last survivor of the first ascent of Mount Everest in 1953. He's 90 now, and I'm 31, and both of us have watched the snow and ice melting rapidly in our lifetimes. I grew up surrounded by the world's highest mountains, playing in their snow. Now, I've dedicated my career to studying them. In fact, the glaciers here are not just melting, they're warming up from the inside. 1/4 of humanity will be hit by the loss of the Hindu Kush Himalayas cryosphere. It was in 2015 in Paris that world leaders agreed to limit warming to 1.5 degrees. But 1.5 degrees is too hot. We need the world to go in emergency mode again and act now to save our snow.
Up to 60% of Bhutan's glaciers will vanish by the end of this century. Nearly all will be gone soon after that. Our people, those that have contributed literally nothing to climate change, find ourselves on the front line to increasingly devastating climate impacts. This autumn, I have decided to cycle all the way to the UN Conference of Parties, carrying with me the 2 bottles of glacier meltwater, a symbol of the rapid, irreversible loss to mountain ice, to call for world leaders and businesses to open their eyes to the unprecedented speed at which we are losing our frozen planet. We know enough about what's happening to know what needs to be done. Choices made now will decide the future for billions. It begins with all of us. Let our voices echo from the roof of the world through the halls of power, demanding action and change to save our snows.
मतलब हमारे पास वक्त नहीं है बिल्कुल भी. हमारे लिए जिंदगी मौत का मसला है. अपोकलिप्स जिसे हम कहते हैं, वेस्ट में अपोकलिप्स कहते हैं कि अभी आगे जाके आएगा. यहाँ पाकिस्तान में वो अपोकलिप्स हो रहा है. वही बात है कि हम उन्हें मैसेज दे दे के थक गए क्योंकि वो नहीं सुन रहे. मगर मैसेज देने का फ़ायदा तब होता है जब दूसरा इंसान सुन रहा हो. ये बात है कि अब हम दुनिया में देख रहे हैं कि बहुत ज़्यादा लोग यूथ को एम्फसाइज कर रहे हैं, मगर हम यंग लोग काम कर नहीं सकते विदाउट द ओल्डर पीपल दैट आर इन पावर. बूढ़े लोग हैं, उनको साथ मिल के काम करने की ज़रूरत है.
Global warming is accelerating. The action window is closing. Half of glaciers are estimated to disappear by 2100. A collapse cryosphere will induce far-reaching consequences, including sea level rising, cascading breakout of tipping elements, as well as the severe impacts on water resources and wildlife habitats. Only taking the responsibility and action immediately, we can safeguard our planet and shape a sustainable future.
The threat of sea level rise creates a multitude of risks for the city of New Orleans and our surrounding areas, including wetland loss, inland flooding, and increased subsidence. If the current trend holds, New Orleans will be a literal coastal city within the next 50 years with no protective land barriers. However, the main threat is inland flooding due to the more intense and frequent rainfalls. To combat inland flooding, reinforcing and creating sustainable infrastructure is essential to fight back against climate change. The time is now.
Haiti faces the Pacific Ocean, and we have more than 40 islands. the ocean plays a crucial role in our lives, and sea level rise could pose a serious threat to us. We have a grave and unavoidable issue of flood tides. They are brought by typhoons, and sea level rise would only worsen the problem. Therefore, we are committed to contributing to carbon neutrality.
Thank you for this opportunity to join you in the call for action against the serious threat to the cryosphere.
Collectively, we cannot just bear witness to these accelerating events. We are resolved to act. The most important thing that we can do to protect the cryosphere and people and livelihoods everywhere is by rapidly lowering our emissions in this critical decade. COP28 must produce an ambitious outcome that helps keep 1.5 degrees within reach, including through our work on the global stocktake. We must seek to better understand unknown risks by improving our science around these critical planetary systems. Particularly, we need to understand what are called the tipping points, the points at which there is no reclaiming, there is no coming back. We must work together and further strengthen our cooperation on these critical issues in our existing venues.
I'm here in the Himalayas where glaciers are melting at record level, like in Greenland, like in Antarctica. Sea levels are rising, and here we see floods, we see landslides, we see communities being dramatically impacted. We must stop this madness. We must make sure that we limit temperature rise to 1.5 degrees. Glaciers are retreating. We cannot retreat. We must move forward with climate action.